Hello everyone, that's tuning in to the 7th Autumn 2018 Analogues update from GWV.com. So we've done 6 updates so far, and quite interesting updates. There have been 2, I think, but we're nearing the end of the Autumn updates now. We've just got this week's and next week's analogues to go, and then we'll be out of time, really. The following week we will release the GWV.com Autumn 2018 forecast. So it's getting very, very close now to having to come up with an idea about this autumn. I must say I'm struggling quite a lot at the moment about what the where the prospects will be for this autumn. We've got one more season model roundup to do for the autumn as well. That will be the day before we release the autumn forecast. The autumn forecast is going to be released on the 26th of August. So the season model roundup will be the day before on the Saturday. I think that'll be 25th of August. So we've got a few more updates still to go. Try and get a bit of a firmer idea. But at the moment I am sort of struggling a little bit with this autumn, I must admit. Now, the 7th update, we really wanted this one to be focusing on the autumns that follow exceptionally dry Julys, because, of course, last week, the 6th update focused on the hottest Julys on record, because we have had an exceptionally hot July this year. So we wanted to follow on from that with very dry Julys, because of course July 2018 not only was a very hot month, it's also a very dry month as well. Unfortunately, we've not been able to get that together for you this week due to problems at the reanalysis website that I talked about last week. So there's a website that we use to get these reanalysis charts for you from NOAA, basically NOAA in the United States, and one of their websites where we get these reanalysis charts from has been down over the past couple of weeks, still down at the moment. I'm not sure what the problem is. We're hoping that it'll be resolved by the time we begin the winter updates, which, by the way, will be starting very shortly now. Just 3 weeks today will be the first winter 2018-19 update. So the upshot is we've had to shelve that. We're hoping to bring you in the data next week for the very autumns following very dry Julys. This is going to be an ENSO special. So this one is going to be the update that we planned for next week. So it's all a bit mixed up due to this reanalysis site being down. But anyway, I hope you find this video interesting and informative. We are looking at the autumns that are basically ENSO neutral autumns. A few of these do progress to El Nino, but they're basically ENSO neutral autumns following a La Nina. The situation that we're in with ENSO at the moment is that at the moment we're at ENSO neutral. We had a La Nina at the start of the year, so winter 17-18 was a La Nina winter. We have gone from La Nina to ENSO neutral through this summer, and most of these autumns are going to be a continuation of ENSO neutral conditions. 1 or 2 of them do go to La Nina. To El Nino, I should say. The La Nina to El Nino pattern is quite unusual, so there aren't that many years that do that, but we have got a few included in this update. But most of these are ENSO neutral autumns. We're very unsure whether we're going to have an ENSO neutral autumn or whether we'll go to an El Nino through this autumn. I'll talk you through more about that in a second. Just say that today's second video coming up this afternoon will be GWV's Sunday Roundup, so we haven't got too many more of those to do either, but the latest GWV's Sunday Roundup will be with you after lunch. This video can be quite a long video, as always, with the longer range stuff, so later on today, this video will be placed on the autumn updates and forecast page. There'll be a written summary that goes with it as well, just going over everything that we've discussed in the video. Hope you find it interesting and informative, and with that said, I think we better get on with it. So we're going to begin by having a look at this chart, which is the cold and warm episodes by season chart from CPC and NOAA. So I'll just talk you through what we're talking about here. So on this chart, the red colours are depicting El Nino events, warm events. For example, here in 91, 92, we've got an El Nino event starting in the middle of 1991 and carrying on through the winter of 91, 92, ending in the middle of the year 1992. So that was an El Nino event during 1991, 1992, a warm event. Conversely, we have a La Nina event being depicted by the blue colours, the negative minus colours. So let's deal with 97, 98, because this is a classic situation where we have this El Nino event starting through the early part of 1997, continues through 1997, actually comes a Super Nino late in the year of 1997. That Super Nino continues, Super El Nino event continues into the early part of 1998. Then through the middle of 1998, we get this drop down in the temperature. We go back to ENSO Neutral. And then through the second half of 1998, we actually go into a cold event, into a La Nina. So typically, La Ninas will follow El Ninos. A more unusual scenario is to have an El Nino following a La Nina. Normally you'd have a period of ENSO neutral conditions, and then you will go on into an El Nino event probably the following year. There are some examples, though, of El Ninos following a La Nina. For example, 1976 did this. It's very late El Nino, but what happened in 1976, well, we had a very long La Nina starting in 1973, interestingly, really prolonged cold event from 1973 throughout the whole of 1974. And throughout the whole of 1975 as well. So extremely prolonged cold event there through the early 1970s into the mid-1970s. That La Nina continued into 1976 as well, gradually fading back to ENSO neutral through the summer of 1976. And then in the autumn, and more particularly in the late autumn, we go into this El Nino event, into this warm event. So that's done a classic sort of La Nina to El Nino, which is quite unusual. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Normally it will be La Ninas following El Nino. It's quite unusual to get an El Nino following a La Nina, but it can happen, and that is one example of 1976 where it did happen. Right, so let's come down to our latest year, which is 2018. So for this, we've got to go back to 2017. So 2017 is ENSO neutral through much of the first half of the year. At one point through the middle of 2017, it looked like we was going to find ourselves going into a warm event, into an El Nino, which would have been a situation of an El Nino following a La Nina, because we had La Nina conditions at the end of 2016. So if we had gone into an El Nino last summer, then that would have been a situation like 1976 where we have when we have El Nino following La Nina. Actually, what happened is that the El Nino collapsed, and a very late starter, we did go into another La Nina through the end of 2017. So 2018 begins with La Nina conditions. So we know for the start of this year, and the starting point for our analogues is that La Nina has to be kind of like the starting point. So at the moment it's La Nina to ENSO neutral, because the black colours here tell us that we have gone back to ENSO neutral conditions since the start of the year. So at the moment we're at ENSO neutral. That was our latest tri-monthly number for the tri-monthly period of May, June, July, coming out at just 0.1 of a degree above average in the equatorial, central part of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Now, if the modelling is right, then we're going to see red numbers appearing in the boxes in the final sort of tri-monthly periods of the year. These tri-monthly periods just here. The modelling is very keen to take us into an El Nino event. So this is, for example, CFS V2, region 3.4, which is Central Equatorial Pacific ENSO forecast. And that's going firmly for a moderate, almost now getting close to borderline strong El Nino, can you believe, through the sort of end of the year around November, December, which is kind of like when ENSO tends to peak. It is actually going for a borderline strong El Nino. Certainly a moderate El Nino is being forecast by CFS V2, but can we really get that intense an El Nino event from following on from a La Nina, which is very unusual to go to an El Nino from La Nina anyway, and also where we are right now, which is just 0.1 of a degree above average. We are not in El Nino threshold at the moment. Certainly wasn't for the last tri-monthly period of May, June, July. So it's all a little bit of a mystery, this. Either it's going to be, and this would be my punt, my best guess, that modelling is probably going to be wrong, and in the end we're going to be going from La Nina to ENSO Neutral. But there is the chance that we might also go from La Nina straight to El Nino via ENSO Neutral. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. As I say, most of these analogues are looking at autumns that are going from La Nina to ENSO Neutral, but there are a few included that are doing the classic ENSO Neutral to El Nino scenario. We wanted to bring them all together as much as best we can, really, because we want to get all this done for this particular update, because we are rapidly now running out of time for these analogues. So let's very quickly go through. We begin by looking at the autumn of 1876. So this one is going from La Nina to ENSO Neutral, and we find that we have below average heights to our south. We have above average heights up to the north around Greenland, so a classic blocking signal. And so this one looks like it will be a very cool and quite unsettled autumn with the jet stream down here. And because of the blocking, we will be pulling some quite cold air down into the UK. So that'd be a cold autumn in 1876, and also quite unsettled too. The next autumn that is going from La Nina to ENSO Neutral is 1880, and this one has a blocking feature around Greenland with below average heights underneath it in the middle of the Atlantic and also over Scandinavia. The flow and the jet will be doing something like that. So again, it looks like it's probably quite a cold autumn, that probably less so than the previous one, but nevertheless it's a strong blocking signal close to Greenland. We've got the trough in over Scandinavia, so another pretty cold autumn there in 1880. 1887 follows a very similar path. So again, we have this strong blocking feature. This time a little bit to the south of Greenland, but generally quite a block in place there with this La Nina to ENSO Neutral autumn. And then we get below average heights away to our east, which means we're doing something like that, but flowing with the jet. We're on the cold side of the jet. And again, this will be another pretty cold and fairly unsettled autumn as well in 1887. Bit of a change for 1885. This one is a mild autumn. It's a warm autumn with above average heights generally over and to the east and southeast of the UK, and below average heights down to the southwest. So it means we'd be pulling up a very mild, quite a warm sort of southerly flow with that. I think there's a very warm September in 1895. We're into the 20th century, so this is 1904, the autumn of 1904, following on from a La Nina at the start of 1904, and then going back to ENSO Neutral, is looking like this, with above average heights, so that's high pressure, generally in over top of the UK. So that's a very quiet, very settled autumn. It's not a cold pattern either, because the jet stream would be to our north. The jet stream will be going up there. So on the warm side of the jet, we're under an area of high pressure. You would just get a lot of settled and quite warm, at least initially anyway, quite warm weather in that autumn. 1917 looks like this, so this is very unsettled autumn. We've got below average heights up to the north, big trough of low pressure to the north of the UK, above average heights are out to the southwest, the flow and the jets coming through like that, so I assume that would have been a very wet autumn, and probably quite cool at times as well, because the air is coming from the northern Atlantic, but the main thing with that, probably a very unsettled autumn. 1925 is a cold autumn. This one's been cropping up a little bit in our analogues packages. Actually, we've got above average heights to our north, below average heights are to the south, to the east. We're opening the door to those northerly winds. That's a cold autumn in 1925. 1934 looks like that. Remember, all of these autumns are going from La Nina to ENSO Neutral. One or two will be going to El Nino. We get below average heights over and to the south of the UK in 1934, with above average heights out to the west and also to the east. That one looks rather unsettled, and although the flow is like that, I think there would have been some cold weather in the autumn of 1934, but maybe it's rather unsettled autumn. That one's been cropping up quite a lot in our analogues packages as well. I think 1939 comes up next. So this one, I'm sure you're aware that the winter of 1939-1940 was exceptionally cold. It's the first winter of the Second World War. And through the first sort of 40 years of the 20th century, generally the winters are mild or very mild. There are one or two severe winters. There's 1917 and there's 1929. Quite cold winters or very cold winters, but generally through this period from 1895 to 1940 or 1939, generally most of the winters are actually quite mild. And then we get to the winter of 1939-1940, the first winter of the Second World War, and we get a very severe spell. We get our first sort of freezing negative CT month since February 1895 in the winter of 1940. So the autumn of 1940 is actually bedding in the pattern that we're going to get through the winter. So we find that we get this big area of above average heights of blocking close to Greenland and Iceland, with below average heights to the south of the UK. And we're already sort of bedding in the pattern that will become more evident through the winter of 1939. 1940. Remember, again, this is an La Nina to ENSO Neutral or possibly El Nino type autumn. So that's quite an interesting one. Then we go through to 1943. The autumn of 1943 looks like this, with above average heights again out in the middle of the Atlantic, and then we've got below average heights. Let's change the colour. Below average heights both to the north and to the south of the country. And the flow of the jet is kind of in a similar position to where it is in 1934. Actually, the autumn of 1934 doing something rather like that. Again, not a particularly cold autumn and a little bit on the unsettled side. Then we go through to 1965, and the autumn of 1965 looks like that, with above average heights to the north, so quite a blocking signal, and below average heights down to the south. This is a cold autumn in 1965, cold and unsettled. And I think November 1965 was a fairly wintry month, actually had quite a lot of wintry weather. 1972 looks like that, so we get a signal for above average heights to be centred almost over the top of the country. This one is another very quiet, very dry and also very mild autumn, with the jet stream going up there. So a lot of mild, dry and quiet weather in the autumn of 1972. And then we've got 1976. This is cropping up a lot in our analogues packages at the moment. So this, if we do go to an El Nino through this autumn, because we know, we've already looked at it, that the autumn of 1976 did actually do that unusual progression of La Nina to El Nino via ENSO Neutral. So by the end of the autumn, definitely 1976, we was actually into a weak El Nino event. If that is indeed the way we go, that the models want to take us in that direction, and that's what happens, then 1976 is going to be a very, very good analogue, be a really close analogue for this autumn, would you believe? So maybe after a hot and dry summer, we're about to open up the heavens, because, again, a recap of the reanalysis for the autumn of 1976. We've seen it a lot in the updates just recently, but a reminder, it's a really unsettled autumn. There's below average heights almost over the top of the UK, a strong blocking signal up to our north as well. That's kind of like the high pressure that was sitting over the UK through the summer, migrated north essentially through the autumn and allowed the Atlantic and the jet stream in. So it's an exceptionally wet autumn following the great drought that began in late 1974 and continued through to the summer of 1976. That is cropping up a lot in our analogues at the moment, and I would expect to see that next week as well, of course, when we look at the dry Julys also. Right, so we're through to 1984 next. This is how the autumn of 1984 looks. This one is cropping up a little bit in the analogues as well, I think, this year. We've got below average heights generally over and to the west of the UK, bringing the jet stream through. So it's a very unsettled autumn. There's a lot of wet weather. It's also a mild or even a very mild autumn with the flow coming in off the Atlantic. Nothing to produce cold weather really in 1984. We'd have to wait until the very end of December 1984, I mean January 1985 for anything particularly cold. 1989, now this one is cropping up quite a bit in the analogues as well, and this is in complete contrast to 1976. So the autumn of 1989 actually has a big area of above average heights centred over top of the country. The below average heights are pushed well to our north. They're up here and also down there. So that's why I'm a little bit I find it hard this autumn, because there are a lot of conflicting signals, and the fact that 1976, which is an exceptionally wet autumn, and 1989, which is an exceptionally dry autumn, the fact that they are both cropping up quite a lot tells us that this is a very, very difficult forecast. It's going to be a very difficult forecast indeed to get together. 1996 comes up next. This one has been appearing quite a bit in the analogues this year too. So this is an unusual autumn. It has below average heights over and to the east-southeast of the country. Quite a strong blocking signal as well. There's a mix of weather through this autumn, but it does have a reasonably cold November in 1996. Then we've got 2001, and the autumn of 2001 looks like that, with above average heights quite close to the country. Again, a real mix of weather through this autumn. It has quite a cool and fairly showery September. It has, for one point, a record-breakingly mild October. I think that's been beaten since, but at one point, October 2001 was record-breakingly warm. And then it has quite a chilly November as well, so a real mix of weather, but pretty dry autumn in 2001. 2006 is cropping up a lot at the moment. This is kind of similar to the reanalysis chart for the autumn of 1895, interestingly, because it has this area of above average heights over and to the east-southeast of us, with below average heights in the middle of the Atlantic. So we pull the flow and the jet up rather like that. That was exceptionally warm autumn, following on from the hot summer of 2006. That one was also going from La Nina at the start of 2006 through ENSO Neutral in the summer to a very weak El Nino for the end of 2006 into early 2007. So again, if we do that transition from La Nina to El Nino by the end of this year, then 2006 will be one of a few matches to that. And then we've got 2009. So again, this is starting off as a La Nina at the beginning of the year. It's going through ENSO Neutral, and then this one also is going to El Nino by the end of the autumn and into the winter of 2009-2010. This one is a very quiet autumn, or at least very quiet for the first 2 months. It has anticyclonic signal overall, and it's generally centred to our south, with below average heights out in the Atlantic, the flow and the jet doing something like that. It has a very dry September and a very dry October, but then in November the heavens just absolutely open up with an exceptionally wet November in 2009. Of course, that precedes the very cold winter of 2009-2010. 2012 comes up next. This is more of an ENSO Neutral type autumn. So, again, interesting this, because it starts off as a La Nina, it goes to ENSO Neutral, and at one point through the summer of 2012, all of the modelling wanted to take us into an El Nino through the autumn of 2012 and the winter of 2012-13. That El Nino collapsed around September, and actually we just finished up at ENSO Neutral through the autumn. So as we're going along, this idea that we go from La Nina to the possibility of an El Nino is becoming more frequent. It's normally very unusual to do it, but as we're going along and getting to more modern years, it's becoming more frequent for the possibility to occur, but actually very often it fails, because it is, as I say, I keep saying, it's very unusual to do that, to go from La Nina to El Nino via ENSO Neutral. It's an unusual thing to do, and maybe there is a little bit of a bias within the model output actually to want to produce El Nino events all the time. I'm not sure if that is at work or not. But anyway, this is an ENSO Neutral autumn in 2012 that at one point looked like it would be going into an El Nino event. This one very unsettled and quite cold autumn, with below average heights over the UK and above average heights in the middle of the Atlantic, and that leaves us on the chilly side of the jet stream. Notice quite a lot of northern blocking as well, beginning to bed in the pattern that will become more apparent through the winter of 12-13. Right, so that's all of the years. Now we're going to put it all together. So let's combine all of those years that are going, mainly, most of them are going from La Nina to ENSO Neutral. A few of them do manage to pull off the La Nina to El Nino scenario. Let's have a look at all of these Septembers combined. This is how they come out. We find that actually quite a blocking signal in the Septembers. We get above average heights centering over the north, to our north, around Greenland and Iceland, with below average heights down to the south of the country down here. So it's quite a blocking signal that we've got there. Not necessarily all that wet with those Septembers, because we've blocked off the Atlantic, but I suppose the wettest weather could be in the south. But the main thing is that probably quite a chilly, probably quite a cool signal, and maybe unsettled at times in the Septembers. The Octobers of those years, when you put them all together, are looking like this, with again above average heights to our north, but a little bit more to the northwest. We get below average heights both to the east and to the south. Again, probably not particularly wet Octobers, because the Atlantic is rather blocked off, so it's not an Atlantic onslaught. Probably again favouring rather coolish Octobers, but less so compared to the Septembers, because the blocking signal is significantly weaker overall in the Octobers. And then the Novembers, though, they look much more unsettled. Look at this, we get this big area of below average heights almost over the top of the country. We do still have a little bit of a ridge, but it's well away from us in the central part of the Atlantic. And so the Novembers are very unsettled after probably not overly wet. The Novembers, I should say, are very unsettled after probably not overly wet Septembers and Octobers. Looks like we go into a very wet pattern as we get through into the Novembers, and probably quite mild with a lot of these Novembers as well, with the wind and the flow coming in from off the Atlantic. Putting it all together for the autumns, that's how we look. So we do get a bit of a blocking signal appearing for the autumn. So we get below average heights to the south and also to the east, with above average heights out to the west and the northwest. So it's high pressure in the northern Atlantic. Looks rather cool and unsettled signal, I think, overall for these autumns. One last thing to show you is when we just isolate out the weak La Niñas. So we know that let's come back to this chart again, right at what we started off with. So we know this was a weak La Niña that we had at the beginning of the year. It's at its strongest, which is this trimonthly period here, November, December, January 2017-18. It went down to -1.0. That's weak La Niña territory. So this is an ENSO neutral, possibly El Nino autumn, following a weak La Nina. And so let's just isolate out those years that actually just have weak La Ninas at the start of the year. So there aren't as many years within this Analogues package. And so these are probably the most relevant years for the situation we're currently in. I'll talk you through those. We've got 1925, 1934, 1939, 1965, 1972, 1984, 1996, 2001, 2006, 2009, and 2012. Those are the years that begin with weak La Ninas and then go to ENSO neutral, or in some cases, a minority of cases, go to an El Nino. And we see that for these autumns, so it's a very similar signal for the Septembers. You put all the years together, combine them all for the Septembers, we get above average heights to the north of the UK, we get below average heights to the south down there. So we still have that bloggy signal, but it isn't anywhere near as intense as it is when we've got all of those other years combined into a mix. Nevertheless, probably favouring rather cool, and for the south anyway, rather changeable Septembers. The Octobers look more anticyclonic with these years, so we've almost got an area of high pressure centred over top of the country. And although that high pressure does go a little bit to our north, I don't think these are overly cold Octobers really. We've got below average heights out here and also over there. So at times I suppose we could pull down some cooler air from the northwest, but overall, and probably are some cold Octobers mixed in there, but overall again, I don't think that particularly favours a cold October, but it does favour a very dry signal for October. And then, so I wanted to show you the November. So there's the Novembers. Got them a little bit mixed up. So there's the Novembers following weak La Ninas. And again, very unsettled signal for the Novembers with an area below average heights almost centred over top of the UK. So a complete flip from the Octobers. Again, reminder of the Octobers, that's it, to the Novembers. Complete flip around. Very dramatic change from October to November with these years that have just weak. That start off with just weak La Ninas and then go to ENSO neutral. That's how the autumns overall look. So the northern blocking signal is weaker with these autumns, quite substantially so actually, although it is fairly strong over here over the top of the pole. And then we get the below average height signal close to the UK. So they do look rather unsettled, these autumns, but bear in mind a lot of that is down to the Novembers, with October actually favoured to be quite dry. So that's it. That's brought you up to date with the ENSO side of things. Again, very confused picture this. Are we going to stay at ENSO neutral this autumn? Will we go, as the models want us to do, to an El Nino event through the autumn? It's going to be fascinating to see how it works out. It gives us a lot of uncertainty for the autumn forecast. We've got years as diverse as, or autumns as diverse as 1976 at one end of the extreme, and then 1989 at the other end of the extreme, cropping up quite a lot in our autumn analogues this year. So it is a very confused picture. And we've only got 2 weeks to go now before we issue the autumn forecast. I really am struggling with this year's autumn forecast, I must admit, but hopefully things will become clearer in the next couple of weeks. Right, that's it. So this video will be placed on the autumn updates and forecast page with a written summary going through everything that we discussed in the video later on today. And coming up this afternoon, of course, we will have your GWV Sunday roundup with only, once this one's out of the way, we've only got another couple of those left to do before it all gets put on the shelf and we go off and running into the winter updates on the first Sunday of September. But before that, of course, we have got the autumn forecast to release in just 2 weeks' time. Right, so at 34 minutes, that's all for now, and thanks for watching.